Hi, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and it is currently January 2023, but I thought that today we would go back in time to May 2020. I know, that might not be a time we want to visit, but it was a very special month for me because in May of 2020, KnitCrate featured me in their KnitCrate's, their Knit and Crochet Club boxes with the theme of blank canvas. What I'm about to show you is a video that I originally made to go along with this KnitCrate, but since KnitCrate has gone out of business and deleted their YouTube channel, I figured it's a great KoolAid tutorial, and so I would share it with all of you here. So enjoy this tutorial that I made originally for KnitCrate back in 2020. Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and the theme of the May 2020 KnitCrate and SockCrate is blank canvas. So I'm pleased to be here with KnitCrate to show you all how you can create some beautiful hand-dyed yarn using KoolAid. I love dyeing yarn with food coloring. In fact, I started my own yarn dyeing journey over a decade ago with KoolAid. It is the perfect technique for beginners. In this video, I am going to demonstrate two different techniques. We will create a semi-solid colorway on the stovetop using kettle dyeing, and we will create some two-colored speckled yarn on the countertop that we will set in the microwave. Since we're dyeing yarn with food coloring, everything we're doing today is kitchen safe, it's food safe, so I am personally comfortable in using my cooking pots and pans for this type of dyeing project. You don't need dedicated dye equipment today. What do you need for this project? In addition to the yarn and KoolAid that came in your KnitCrate, you will need some water, a heat source like a stove or microwave, and some stove or microwave safe dishes. Some plastic wrap or gloves can come in handy for this project, but they are completely optional. Let's go get started to create some beautiful colors together. Today we are going to dye 300 grams of Dyer Supplier 80/20 sock yarn. This yarn is 80% Superwash Merino, 20% Nylon. And we're going to be using a total of 3 packets of KoolAid to create these colorways. To dye yarn with food coloring, you need 4 main components: the food coloring, a protein-based yarn like wool, alpaca, or silk, heat, and then finally acid. One of the benefits of KoolAid packets is that they contain citric acid as the first ingredient, which means that you don't need to have any additional citric acid or vinegar around for your project. You are always welcome to add additional acid, but I've found that it's not necessary. There's enough acid in the KoolAid packets to dye your yarn. I pre-soaked the yarn in some plain tap water for a couple of hours, but in general I have found that 20 to 30 minutes of soaking is sufficient for the fibers to get really saturated. To create a tonal semi-solid colorway, I've added 8 cups of cool tap water to this pot on my stove, and in it we are going to dissolve 1 packet of Orange KoolAid. Pour your packet of KoolAid into your water and then stir it up until it is well dissolved. You are welcome to wear gloves if you'd like. Food coloring can stain your fingers a little bit, but I found that it usually washes off within a day. I removed 100 grams of yarn from the Presoak and gently squeezed out some of that liquid. And we're now going to add it to our cool dye bath and sort of use our spoon to gently move things around to help that color access as much of the yarn as possible. If you worry about the yarn getting tangled, you can add some additional ties to it. Now, with KoolAid, I find that some of the colors will start striking pretty quickly. You'll notice that the dye bath is looking a little more cleared. But once we sort of move things around to help that dye access our yarn, I'm now going to turn on the heat and let things warm up to just below a boil. Once I start to see some bubbles, then I'll reduce the heat to low. Already there is not a ton of color left in the dye pot, but you do want to add heat to completely set the colorway. If you want your color to be more intense, you can use more than 1 packet of KoolAid, Or you can add some other food coloring to your pot. Liquid drops, Gatorade, whatever you might have on hand. One word of caution, however, is that the more packets of Kool-Aid you start with, the more acid is in your pot, and therefore the faster the colors will start striking. And so this can make it harder to achieve something that is more semi-solid, but by waiting and adding the heat after we've added the yarn, the color coverage is more even. If you want something with greater tonal variation, then heat up your dye bath first and maybe even add dry yarn, because that'll give you more unevenness to the colorway. Now I'm going to let this go ahead and heat up over the next 20 minutes. And keeping an eye on the temperature so that way we don't hit a rolling boil. But this will provide the heat that is needed to completely set this beautiful sort of creamsicle orange we have going on here. There is a lot of color here in one packet of Kool-Aid, but the amount of color does vary between different flavors. For example, pink lemonade has a lot less pigment than cherry. After 20 minutes, I am turning off the heat completely, and you can see that our dye bath is completely clear. All of the pigment is now in our yarn. So we can let things cool completely before we go and wash the yarn. If you supplemented your Kool-Aid with additional food coloring and there's still color left in the pot, you can let the yarn heat on low for longer, or you can try adding a splash of white vinegar to make things more acidic to help that color bind. Next, we are going to dye a more speckled colorway here on my countertop. I protected the work surface with some plastic wrap, but you could also do this on a cookie sheet or some plates, anything that you have on hand. The only time I do recommend using plastic wrap is if you're doing a hand-painted colorway where you don't want color from one section to touch color from another section. And so I'll show you how you can roll up your colorway. I gently squeezed the water out of 200 grams of the yarn so that way it's damp but not dripping. And now here I am just sort of spreading this out here on the surface without trying to tangle it. This yarn does come with plenty of ties on it, but you can also add additional ties if you're nervous about tangles. I am going to add the powder to 2 small bowls. When it comes to speckling itself, I personally like to use my fingers to apply powders. Kool-Aid is fairly coarse, and I find it easier to pick up a pinch in my fingers and slowly let it fall onto the yarn. But some people prefer to use, say, a dusting wand or a salt and pepper shaker. Really, it comes down to preference. But you can see the Kool-Aid starting to sink into the yarn from those first speckles that I just added of our grape color. Here's a little bit more of a close-up view. I'm really just letting the color slowly fall out of my fingers. I'm going for something a little heavier. If you wanted to dilute your Kool-Aid a little more to get finer speckles, you could mix it with some sugar powder, some salt or something to help you spread it out even further. So the acid that we need is in our Kool-Aid. So we didn't need to add any other acid to our project yet. And here is some of our cherry. And I'm just going to be layering these 2 colors on top of each other to create some fun speckled yarn. Ideally, you want your fingers to be pretty dry when you're doing this. You want to be able to drop this Kool-Aid onto your yarn. You don't want it to stick to your fingers or to your gloves. One other thing I should add at this point is that grape and cherry are 2 very pigmented colors of Kool-Aid. So they are particularly good for doing some speckles like I am demonstrating here. However, a lot of other colors, even ones that are less pigmented, can also give you some really great speckles. And I have played around with a lot of them. I think the only color that isn't great for giving speckles is lemonade, but yellow in general is really hard to get speckles to show up. Once you are satisfied with the amount of color you've added to your first side, we want to flip the yarn to add more color. I do want to go and rinse my hands off first, because if I were to touch the yarn with this little bit of Kool-Aid on my fingers, that's going to transfer. A quick rinse and dry and my hands are fairly clean. There's a little bit of staining, but not too bad. So I'm gently going to pick up the yarn, flip it over, and once again try to spread out the yarn as much as we can without tangling. You may want to flip a total of 3 to 4 times. In general, the Kool-Aid strikes in a pretty shallow way, so if you want good penetration of color throughout your whole skein, after we do this side, then we'll probably want to do the inside of the skein as well. Now I am going to do the same thing, and I am going to, with my fingers, just quickly add some of more speckles to this second side. Some places where you may want to pay closer attention are around ties where the yarn is more grouped together. And so picking up the tie, we can go and look towards the more interior of the skein. For speckling, I like to try to sort of scrunch things up on the surface. If I was hand painting with sections, then I might want it a bit more straight. But you can see that so far we've gotten pretty good color penetration, but I do want to do one more round of speckling here. Now our colorway is complete, but the color has not yet been set. We need to use heat to make this color permanent. And so there are a few ways we can do that. Today I'm going to demonstrate microwaving the yarn, but you can also put it in a steamer basket on the stovetop for 20 to 30 minutes. Ordinarily, with a colorway that is this random, I might choose to plop the yarn into a microwave safe dish and then put on a silicone lid or something and to just heat it up like that. You can use this plastic wrap we used to protect our work surface to wrap the yarn up into a jelly roll. And then you can place this whole jelly roll in a steamer basket, on your stovetop, in a crock pot. Today I am going to microwave this yarn. I will microwave it on high using 2-minute increments for a total of 4 to 6 minutes, or when this jelly roll is hot to touch. Once the yarn is piping hot, now you want to leave it to let it cool completely so we can set this color. We have a fair amount of Kool-Aid pigment left over. I think in total we maybe used between 1/2 to 2/3 of each of the 2 Kool-Aid packets on the 200 grams of yarn that we dyed today. If you're familiar with the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel, you'll know that I can never leave any dye behind. So I've got plans for this Kool-Aid right here. But you can save it in a Ziploc bag to use another day, or you can use it to add more color and over dye your project if you decide you want more pigmentation there. Now that the yarn has cooled, we can wash it in some plain tap water. Here is our speckled jelly roll, and here is our beautiful speckled yarn. When washing the yarn, I try to keep a hand through the yarn like an extra tie, but if the yarn does look tangled, wait until it's dry to try to resolve it. But you can see that there is no color bleeding off of our beautiful yarn. I'm now going to add a little bit of some clear dish soap. Kool-Aid does have some things in it besides citric acid and food coloring. There is some flavoring in there, and we want to make sure it is rinsed out. Again, there is no bleeding. With food coloring or acid dyes, you always want to wash with cool water. So now I am going to go hang up the yarn, and then we will come back and have some conclusions. Here is the finished dry yarn. We have a beautiful creamsicle orange, and then our purple and red speckled yarn, all created with a total of 3 packets of Kool-Aid. Technically, not even 3 packets of Kool-Aid. We had some cherry and grape left over, enough for me to dye this tonal skein of Dyer Supplier Superwash MCN sock yarn. And you can see that there was a lot of pigmentation left over. These speckles are fantastic and heavily placed across the skein. It's worth noting that while we dyed these 2 skeins of yarn at the same time, since they're hand dyed, there will be differences between the 2 of them. So if you're going to use both in one project, I recommend blending them together, alternating skeins every couple of rounds, so that way there's not a distinct difference when you switch from one skein to another. But this is honestly a recommendation I make for hand-dyed yarn all the time. There are so many different flavors and colors of Kool-Aid that exist. But if you want to expand your color palette even more, try supplementing your Kool-Aid with some liquid or gel food coloring. There are so many different brands out there, and as long as it's artificial food coloring, it should work really, really well to dye your yarn. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope I inspired you to try dyeing yarn with Kool-Aid at home. In addition to being kitchen safe, dyeing yarn with Kool-Aid and food coloring is a perfect activity to do along with your kids. My preschooler and kindergartner love to dye yarn along with me. Today's video demonstrated just two of unlimited possibilities in the way that you can combine food coloring, acid, wool-based or protein-based yarn, and heat. You can dissolve your Kool-Aid in some water and using a foam brush, paint a variegated colorway and then steam set it. Or you can use one color at a time and dip dye your skein into those different colors. There are so many different ways you can combine these, and I cannot wait to see what you create. Please share your own dyeing projects on Instagram and tag me and KnitCrate. You can find our handles below. We'd love, love, love to see the beautiful colors that you created. If you'd like more ideas or inspiration on how to dye yarn with food coloring, or if you'd like to watch me begin my journey into commercial dyes, go and check out the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. I have hundreds of yarn dyeing videos, and I love to try things out for the first time on camera, so that way we can all learn from my mistakes and successes. And thankfully, there's more successes than mistakes. You can find a link to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel in the video description. I would like to thank KnitCrate for featuring me in their May 2020 crates. This is a huge honor, and I love the opportunity to share my passion for dyeing yarn with all of you. And finally, if you have enjoyed this whole process and you want more yarn to dye, go and check out Dyer Supplier, KnitCrate's sister company, for some beautiful bear yarn. They have so many gorgeous bear yarn bases, and just about all of them can be dyed with food coloring. Thank you so much for watching, everyone! I hope that you enjoyed this look back in time at a tutorial that I made almost 3 years ago. I have noticed there are some changes to the way that I speak to the camera. Mainly, I speak a lot faster now, I think. But I'm excited to play around more with color this year. Would you like me to do some more Kool-Aid tutorials? I would love to share that. Now, as I mentioned, KnitCrate and Dyer Supplier are no longer in business. So you can't sign up for KnitCrate's or go buy the 80/20 yarn that I used in this video. However, any Superwash Merino nylon sock yarn would give a very similar result to what we saw here today. KnitPicks has a great 75/25 sock yarn, Bear Stroll, I dye that one all the time. You can also find some fun 80/20 yarns at Wool to Dye For and Nomad. And I did just go and update the where to buy bear yarn list that I have on my website, so you can go and check that out. I'll have a link to it down in the video description if you want to see other sources, some big, some tiny, on where you can go and purchase yarn for dyeing. And although KnitCrate has shut down, I do want to still thank them for the opportunity of them featuring me in this crate. I know it's a way that a lot of you found me to begin with, and was some of your first journeys into dyeing yarn. And so I'm really glad that I can preserve this video so that way we can watch it again, because I think it's a really, really great resource. But anyway, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.